My parents and sister called me, screaming, "Why would you do this to your family?" I hadn't even landed yet. When I got home, they threw my old journal on the table. My sister sneered, "You think you're better than us now?" I laughed through the tears, opened the last page, and what I read out loud made everyone stare in ashamed silence. The room fell deathly quiet. My name is Tessa Alcott. I was born and raised in Springfield, Missouri, in a modest, two-story house on Walnut Street that hadn't been renovated since 1982. The siding was chipped, the shutters permanently crooked, and the fence surrounding the backyard hung on for dear life. Still, that was home. A place full of loud Sunday dinners, strict bedtimes, and unspoken tension that settled into the cracks like dust. I'm the youngest of three. My brother Harold left when I was 10. I was too young to understand what disowned really meant, only that he never called again and Mom cried for 3 days straight. My sister, Mallory, older than me by 5 years, stayed. She always stayed. Sometimes I wonder if that was her punishment. Or mine. My parents, Margaret and Doyle, ran the house with the kind of order you'd expect from a boarding school. We weren't tormented, just managed. There were rules, expectations, and consequences. Dad worked at a logistics firm, and Mom was a dental assistant until she gave it up to keep the house running right. They were functional, not warm. Church every Sunday. No talking back. And secrets? Those were buried deeper than our family photo albums in the attic. I got out the first chance I had. A scholarship to Boston University was my golden ticket. I didn't even pack everything. I just left. Years passed. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in psychology. Moved to Portland. Became a counselor. Married briefly, divorced quietly. No kids. My job kept me busy, and therapy was something I gave to others but rarely took myself. I've gone home maybe 5 times in 10 years. Each visit was the same: tense dinners, cold remarks about how liberal I'd become, and side eyes from Mallory, who now lived with our parents after her divorce. Her ex, Trent, was a cop. No one talked about why they split. Just that Mallory did what she had to do. When I published a book, Fractured Roots, Healing from Family Trauma, my parents didn't mention it. Not a word. Mallory rolled her eyes when I brought it up. I gave them a copy out of courtesy. I should have known better. Last week, I flew back home. It was a last-minute trip. Mom had a scare, a panic attack, apparently, and I was guilted into being there for family. As my plane touched down, my phone exploded with messages. Missed calls. Angry voicemails. "Why would you do this to your family?" Mom shrieked in one. "What gives you the right to air out our business?" Dad bellowed in another. I sat in the back of the taxi from Springfield Branson Airport, confused, anxious, and already exhausted. The last time I felt that sick in my stomach, I was 10 and found my journal missing. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark except for the kitchen, where the lights burned like an interrogation room. All 3 of them were sitting there, Dad at the head of the table, Mallory across from Mom. On the table sat something familiar. Something I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. My old journal. It was frayed at the edges, the cover bent and dusty, but it was unmistakably mine. The Lisa Frank sticker on the back still glimmered under the kitchen light. "Where did you find this?" I asked quietly. Mallory leaned forward. "You think you're better than us now?" Dad stood. "You wrote this trash and then put it in that damn book. You crossed a line." Mom shook her head, her lips tight. "We sacrificed everything for you." I looked at them, then down at the journal. And I laughed. Through the tears that stung, through the nausea crawling up my throat, I laughed. I sat down, opened the last page, and read what I wrote at 12 years old. "If I disappear, it's not an accident. If anyone ever finds this, please know that Harold didn't steal anything. He didn't scream. He didn't hit anyone. He just said no. He told Dad he didn't want to join the meeting in the basement anymore. That's when Dad hit him so hard, he fell against the laundry machine. Mom told him to get out, said he was a liar, and Mallory laughed. That was the night Harold left. No one talks about it. But I saw it. I heard it. And I'll never forget it. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Mallory looked stunned. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You don't understand. You were a kid, I remember, I said. I remember everything. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Mom's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't cry. That would have meant admitting something. Is that what this was all about? I asked. Did I write the truth? What I remembered? That I didn't forget like you wanted me to? You weren't supposed to find that journal, Mom whispered. I wasn't supposed to remember, I corrected. They didn't speak. So I did. I wrote that book for people like Harold. For people like me. For people who've been gaslit by the very people who were supposed to love them. And you're mad? Because I dared to say the truth out loud? Silence. Harold was 15. You threw him out like garbage. And now you're mad that someone is holding up a mirror? Dad sat back down. His hands shook. Mallory stood and walked out. She didn't say another word. Just slammed the back door shut. The days after were tense. I stayed in my old room. Mallory didn't come back. Mom hovered but never apologized. Dad pretended the conversation never happened. But something had shifted. Like a fault line had cracked just enough to let the truth breathe. I found Harold through Facebook. I don't know why I hadn't looked before. Maybe I was afraid. But there he was, living in Santa Fe. A carpenter. Married. 2 kids. When I messaged him, it took him 2 days to reply. You really remember? He asked. Every word. We talked for hours. He told me things I only half remembered, about the basement meetings Dad made him sit through, bizarre lectures about obedience and spiritual purity, where any defiance was punished. I told him about the journal. About the night I read the last page. About the silence that followed. You've done more than I ever could, he said. Come back, I begged. Not for them. For me. He didn't say yes. But he didn't say no. 2 months later, Harold visited. He didn't stay at the house, stayed in a nearby Airbnb with his family. I met his wife, Anya, and their daughters. They looked like him. They laughed like him. We met at a cafe near the Springfield Art Museum. It was raining. The kind of soft, gray rain that makes everything quiet. He gave me a new journal. This one had a cherrywood cover and soft, cream pages. Write the next chapter, he said. Your truth. As for my parents? They never brought it up again. The journal disappeared from the kitchen table the next morning. Mom started going to therapy, something I never thought I'd see. Dad still won't look me in the eye for too long. But he hasn't raised his voice since that night. Mallory? She's distant. Still angry, I think. But maybe, somewhere, she's starting to remember too. I keep the old journal locked in my safe now. Not because I'm afraid it'll be stolen. But because it's proof. Proof that no matter how much they try to bury it, the truth will find its way to the surface. And when it does? It leaves nothing but silence. Mallory, you think you're better than us now, don't you? Me, no. I just finally started telling the truth. I was on the plane from Portland to Springfield when my phone buzzed to life in midair. Text after text, voicemails coming in like floodgates had burst open. My mother's tone, half screaming, half sobbing, echoed in one message. Why would you do this to your family? How could you write that? My father's voice was clipped, seething. You need to get here. Now. And my sisters? Mallory always had a way of making fury sound like smug righteousness. "You're such a narcissist, Tessa." At first, I thought someone had died. The panic in their voices felt like loss. But I hadn't landed in tragedy. I'd landed in reckoning. The moment I walked into my childhood home, the air felt thick, like walking into a storm that had already passed, but the sky hadn't cleared yet. The kitchen lights were too bright. My parents sat at the table, stiff and righteous, like they had rehearsed this intervention. And there, on the table between them, was something that shouldn't have existed anymore. My old journal. It was navy blue, cracked at the corners, a Lisa Frank sticker still faded but intact on the back. I hadn't seen it since I was a child. It had disappeared not long after my brother, Harold, did. I blinked. "Where did you find that?" Mallory was already walking into the room from the hallway. She tossed her keys down on the counter and glared at me like I'd just spat on our mother. "That's what you're worried about? No hello. No hug. No, how was your flight?" Only fury. That's the thing about family. When they think you betrayed them, the love turns cold first. I was still standing when my father growled, "Sit down." So I did. I looked at the journal, then at their faces. Mom's jaw was trembling. Dad's eyes were hard. Mallory crossed her arms and leaned against the fridge like a sentry. "This is what you wrote in your book?" Mom asked. My heart dropped. They'd read it. More specifically, they'd found the parts one never thought they would connect to themselves. When I published my book, Fractured Roots, Healing from Family Trauma, it was marketed as a general memoir and professional guide. I had changed names. Changed places. But not the truth. I had written about growing up in a house where silence was currency and anger was a language. About a brother who vanished after one fight with our father. About a sister who learned to play by the rules and mock anyone who didn't. Apparently, they'd recognized themselves anyway. "What did you expect us to think?" Mom asked, her voice sharp, but wet with emotion. "That maybe you'd ask why I wrote it," I said quietly. "Or what happened. Or how it felt to grow up in a house where no one was allowed to speak the truth." Mallory scoffed. "I wasn't there to fight. I was there because I was tired of pretending." I reached across the table, pulled the journal toward me, and flipped to the last page. My 12-year-old handwriting was round and a little messy. I could barely read the words at first. Then they burned into me. "If I disappear, it's not an accident. If anyone ever finds this, please know that Harold didn't steal anything. He didn't scream. He didn't hit anyone. He just said no. He told Dad he didn't want to join the meeting in the basement anymore. That's when Dad hit him so hard, he fell against the laundry machine. Mom told him to get out, said he was a liar, and Mallory laughed. That was the night Harold left. No one talks about it. But I saw it. I heard it. And I'll never forget it." I read it aloud. Every single word. When I looked up, no one spoke. Mallory's face had drained of color. Mom looked frozen, and Dad's fists, once clenched, had now fallen limp on the table. "You wrote that when you were 12? Mallory said quietly. I nodded. She sat down slowly. The silence was more honest than anything I had ever heard in that house. The next morning, no one mentioned the journal. It was gone from the table. My father went outside to mow a lawn that didn't need mowing. My mother cleaned the same counter 4 times. Mallory stayed holed up in her old bedroom. I was left to sit in the living room, wondering if breaking the silence had actually changed anything. You grow up thinking if you say the truth, it'll fix something. But sometimes it just opens wounds that had been scabbed over in denial for decades. It wasn't about blame. Not anymore. I just wanted to stop carrying their secrets. I had carried them long enough. I stayed longer than I intended. Originally, it was supposed to be a 2-day trip, just long enough to make an appearance, check in on my mom after her health scare, and quietly exit. But after reading the journal, after the silence that followed, I knew leaving right away would only solidify the story they wanted to keep telling themselves, that I was the distant, ungrateful daughter who made up lies for attention. But staying? Staying was excruciating. The house felt haunted. Not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by everything unsaid. The kind of silence that fills a home after years of secrets being polished into normalcy. I kept thinking about how long I had believed that what happened to Harold was somehow my fault, how I hadn't stopped it, how I hadn't told anyone. But I had. I wrote it. I'd buried it in that journal thinking no one would ever read it. And yet, here we were. I texted Harold that night. They found my old journal. I read the last page to them. I didn't expect a quick response, he hadn't messaged me in 3 days since our last conversation. But a minute later, the little dots appeared. What did they say? Nothing. They just went quiet. That's more honest than anything they ever said to me. He followed up with a photo, him and his wife Anya sitting on a porch swing, his youngest daughter asleep on his chest. A quiet life. A safe one. One he built entirely outside the wreckage we both came from. The day after the journal incident, Mom asked me to take her to her cardiologist appointment. It wasn't really a request. More like a statement of obligation. The drive was silent for the first 10 minutes. Then, just before we hit the on-ramp to Glenstone Avenue, she said, "You remember that night better than I do." I glanced over. She was staring straight ahead. "I was scared," she added. "But not of your father. Of what it would mean if I believed Harold." I kept my eyes on the road. "Do you believe me now?" I asked. "I don't think I ever didn't believe you," she said. "I think I just didn't know what to do with the truth." She looked older than I remembered. Not just age-wise, but weary in a way that seemed embedded into her bones. I wondered how much of that was guilt, and how much of it was survival. When we got to the clinic, she didn't say thank you. But when she got out of the car, she reached over and squeezed my hand. It was the closest thing to an apology I would probably ever get. That night, Mallory came into my room. I was lying on the twin bed I used to hate, staring at the ceiling, listening to the cicadas outside. She didn't knock. She never did. She stood in the doorway, holding a glass of wine. "I read your book," she said. I sat up. "You said you didn't." I lied. Of course she had. She came in, sat on the floor, back against my old dresser. "Do you really think I laughed when he left?" I hesitated. "You did." "I was 14, Tessa," she said, sharply. "You think I knew what was going on?" I thought he was lying. That's what they told me. I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. I remembered Mallory as the golden child. She never broke rules. She volunteered at church. She knew how to keep her emotions clean and tidy. It hadn't occurred to me that maybe she believed the lies too. She looked down at her glass. "Dad said Harold was dangerous. Said he tried to hurt Mom." "He didn't," I said. "You know that now, right?" She nodded, slowly. "Now I do." The silence between us wasn't hostile this time. Just hollow. Like we both realized the childhood we shared was built on two completely different scripts. "I didn't want to be the one who stayed," she whispered. "I just didn't know where else to go." That's when it hit me, she hadn't stayed out of loyalty. She stayed because she never learned how to leave. The next few days passed like an awkward peace treaty. No apologies, no confrontations. Just space. And silence. And a kind of exhausted civility that only happens after something foundational has cracked. Dad didn't talk to me much. He was always out in the garage, working on his tools. Fixing things that didn't need fixing. Making noise to drown something out. I didn't push. One night, I went out to the backyard, the same one where we used to play tag and where Harold once taught me how to ride a bike, and saw him sitting at the edge of the porch steps, staring out at the fence. I sat a few feet away, quiet. "You know I loved him, right?" he said after a long while. I didn't respond. He continued, "But I was scared of what he'd become. I thought if I broke it early, his attitude, his defiance, it would save him." I turned toward him. "All it did was make him leave," I said. He didn't argue. Just nodded. It was the first time I saw my father without armor. He looked small. Still stubborn, still wrapped in pride, but not entirely unreachable. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I knew I wouldn't get closure. Closure is a fantasy for people whose wounds aren't inherited. But I felt something shift that week. My journal, once a child's attempt to hold on to sanity, had become a mirror they could no longer ignore. And now that it had been read, there was no going back. I flew back to Portland a week later. The goodbye was muted. There were no hugs. No come back soon. Just tired eyes, uneasy smiles, and the kind of politeness that only comes when people are unsure what role you still play in their lives. Mallory helped me carry my suitcase to the Uber. She didn't say much until the car pulled up. "You know," she said quietly, "you made things a lot harder." I met her gaze. They needed to be harder. She didn't argue. She just gave a curt nod and walked back inside. I watched the house shrink in the rearview mirror with a complicated mixture of emotions: grief, relief, and something that surprised me, resolve. Because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving my family story. I was rewriting it. Back in Portland, I returned to work at the clinic. My clients never knew what I had gone through, and I didn't share it. But I found myself listening differently. More deeply. Less as a professional, more as someone who had finally stepped off the battlefield. I also called Harold. We talked more frequently after that. At first, it was tentative, sharing articles, small updates, parenting stories from his side, work stress from mine. Then one day he said, "You know, if you ever wanted to tell the rest of it, the stuff from the journal, I'd support you." That stuck with me. So I did. I began writing a second book. Not a memoir this time. A novel. It was fiction, technically. But anyone who knew me, or them, would recognize the bones of it. The story was set in a quiet Midwestern town. A deeply religious family, fractured by silence and power, where the youngest daughter finds a childhood journal that ultimately upends everything. I changed names, places, and circumstances. But I left in the truth. It was raw. It was cruel in places. But it was mine. My agent was hesitant at first. "Do you think your family will retaliate?" she asked. I smiled. They already have. When The Basement Room was published a year later, it got picked up by a national book club. Reviews started pouring in, praising the raw honesty, the psychological realism, the exploration of generational dysfunction. People wrote to me, readers, therapists, survivors, saying they saw themselves in the story. That it gave them words they didn't have. Mallory found out through Facebook. She texted me a link to an article and just wrote, "This is you, isn't it?" I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, she sent another message. "You really put it all out there, huh?" This time, I answered. I told the truth. Again. She never responded. But then came the moment I didn't expect. I got an email from a small press in Springfield. A woman named Felicia, who ran a community arts nonprofit, reached out. She wrote, "Hi Tessa. I grew up in Springfield too. I read your book. I know the town. I know the kind of families you wrote about. Would you ever consider doing a reading here? We're trying to bring new voices into spaces that have been silent too long." I stared at the email for a long time. The idea of standing in my hometown and reading that story, in public, it made my stomach twist. But I said yes. The event was held at the Springfield Contemporary Theater, a small but well-known local venue. I flew in the day before and stayed in a hotel this time, not with my parents. Harold and Anya flew in from Santa Fe. They sat in the second row with their girls, who wore little dresses with matching headbands. Seeing him in the crowd nearly broke me. The reading was short, 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A. People asked the usual questions. How much of the story was true? Did I worry about backlash? What would I say to the characters if they were real? Then someone in the back raised their hand. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. She stood up slowly, her hands visibly shaking. She didn't ask a question. She just said, "I'm sorry." The room went quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't run off stage. I nodded. Nothing more. Because I wasn't there for her. The next day, an article ran in the local paper, "Springfield Native Returns with Book That Shakes Foundations, and Sparks Conversations." It featured a photo of me with Harold and his family. The reporter didn't know who he was. Just called him a relative who traveled in for support. But my parents read that paper. Mallory did too. That photo sat on the front page for 2 days in every gas station, grocery store, and library. And that was the moment I realized that was the revenge. Not in blood. Not in screaming. But in truth. In living out loud what they tried to bury. In becoming someone without them, someone better.